Thank you, Piper and Emily and Peg, for joining me today to talk about Best Practice 21, which essentially pertains to learning materials aligning with learning objectives. So because we have a small, gathering here today, we can make this as informal as you like. Unmute, ask questions, put them in the chat. Peg, Emily, jump in whenever you like and chat. This will be recorded and shared. Let me know if there are any issues with that after or by email. And this is one of many workshops that City's offering to complement our recently revised best practices for online teaching or online teaching and course design best practices. So today we'll be talking, as I mentioned, about Best Practice 21, which is essentially the first best practice for the third larger best practice category on learning materials. And here you can see just a glimpse, sorry if it's fuzzy on your end, but you can see a glimpse of what that looks like. The criteria, the description and rationale for the learning objective, and then some really wonderful guides that I believe, Peg, you worked on this one, that the City team created to help you better understand and implement these best practices. So happy to share those documents, the annotated best practices with you, Piper, or with anyone else who's interested. And they're also all available on the best practices pages of our City Center Hub, which is a great SharePoint site that Branka and Lynette developed. So we've talked about a couple different types of or best practices related to alignment. I think this may be the third best practice pertaining to alignment. And it, as I mentioned, can be found under the third sort of best practice category of 7 on learning materials. The others are course structure, activities and interaction, assessment, technology, accessibility and evaluation. And we will have more upcoming workshops pertaining to, we've done a lot of workshops on the first 2 so far, but we'll have more on assessment and technology and accessibility. And I'm sure those are categories that you guys are eager to learn more about. So we'll have those in the near future. So best practice 21 reads that learning materials offered contribute to the achievement of the weekly learning objectives, outcomes, and this relationship is clearly identified or explained. And the bolded text is my emphasis, just to sort of draw out some of the key terms, I think, from these best practice recommendations. The annotation for that, which is a bit more explanation on what that best practice means, reads that the clear identification or explanation of the relationship between the offered learning materials and the weekly objectives ensures that students can effectively achieve their learning goals within the given time frame. So again, we're looking at alignment specifically between our module or weekly objectives and the learning materials that support student sort of mastery of the content that you're teaching. So like the other alignment workshops, I sort of conceive of this again in sort of 2 parts. The yin and yang of this best practice approach. What you should be primarily concerned with for this best practice is first verifying that all your module objectives and materials are aligned. And we'll talk more about what that means in a moment. And then secondly, and I think equally important, is clearly explaining or showing this relationship to your students, making that transparent so that students can see, how what they're doing, what they're reading, what they're engaging in connects what that you're asking them to learn or your objective for that week or module. So it's essentially 2 parts to this best practice. And just as a reminder, learning materials can include textbooks, open source materials, slide presentations, lecture recordings, additional readings, even detailed images and diagrams, websites, audio recordings, podcasts. Any others that I've forgotten, Peg or Emily or Piper? I mean, it really, any material that you're providing to your students to help them, better understand the material that you're teaching them, right? And for them to engage with. And as we always have emphasized, having a diverse array of materials for students to engage with is always recommended. Okay, so the how and the why. Why is this best practice important, and how do we demonstrate that importance to our students? So what really this best practice recommendation emphasizes is how this reading, this recorded lecture, whatever learning material you've provided to your students, how is it connected to what I'm supposed to be learning in this module or week, right? Why am I engaging with it? Students really need to know the purpose of the article they're reading, why you've assigned this, how it helps them achieve their learning goals for that week and ultimately in the course. And also, are the materials suited to the level of the course, to the module content, right? Is it well suited to achievement of those objectives for that module and for the course? So the emphasis is really on, selecting and crafting your learning materials with purpose and intention, right? And being transparent about that relationship so that students know they're not just doing busy work. And maybe if you have some learning materials in there that students that are not intimately connected to your learning goals, maybe they can be discarded, or maybe they can be added as enrichment opportunities and not required materials. I think it's always good to look back and be mindful, because learning materials that are assigned but not directly connected to your learning objectives can cause cognitive overload in your students. So I would always recommend assigning with purpose. And this is really at the heart of this objective and when you're considering alignment in your course overall, not just with your learning materials, but in every aspect of your course. Any questions so far? Any comments? We could get into cognitive load theory and all that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Peg.
I just love your graphics. You have the best graphics of any of us.
Oh, you know what? I found this on Canva and I just really liked it. I was like, how could I express cognitive load? So here's a brain lifting a barbell, right?
A lot of weight.
A lot of weight. So just as a kind of, and I like to try to simplify, speaking of cognitive load, right? Simplify, I'm moving more toward more and more simplification, right? Maybe in every aspect. We're trying to do it in my everyday life, but also in my slide content, right? So that the main point is really emphasized. And so maybe it's a bit of a self-reflexive slide there. So going back to alignment, right? This is a graphic I threw together for one of a previous alignment workshop. And I just put it designed it in the form of a meditating skeleton because, we're in the health sciences, but also because, we're trying to achieve balance, right? Alignment, even if it's just our spinal alignment, right? Is that an adjective, spinal? So just as a reminder that really these things are all interconnected and that your objectives are really form that foundation of your course. It's the spine without which your skeleton cannot stand, right? And they reinforce one another. I put the learning materials on the top where the brain goes, right? Just to reinforce again that essential alignment that enable your students to be able to engage in activities and assessments that reinforce your learning goals. So thinking about that interrelatedness, that importance of making sure everything is aligned and purposeful. Quality Matters represents it in this way, which I think is also a nice graphic that visualizing alignment. Notice how the learning objectives are the foundation on which everything else rests. And we see a kind of Greek temple here to represent that. I have highlighted the objectives and the instructional materials, which is one of those pillars that the assessments ultimately rest on, which is how you evaluate your students to determine whether or not they understand what you're teaching them. So just a couple means of expressing that alignment. So that it gets, kind of abstract, but how is it really realized in your course? Going back to a previous workshop, it really comes down to, or really a wonderful way to determine that is by creating or utilizing your alignment map. This can take time to develop, right? Or maybe you inherited one and you revisit it on occasion. But an alignment map is essentially just a kind of blueprint for your course where you outline a module or a unit or something according to your objectives for that module, and then all the things that students will read, engage with, do, and be tested on throughout that module to help them achieve their objectives. So I put in this sample, again, going back to the health sciences, where you see one of the course learning objectives is applying proper CPR techniques. So breaking that down into smaller, more discrete steps as a module objective would do. Maybe one of those key steps is demonstrating the correct technique for performing chest compressions. So notice how the objective is aligned with the larger course objective, at least insofar as my non-SME brain can wrap my head around that too. And then subsequently, the learning materials reinforce that. So I've selected a couple learning materials. Again, have not evaluated this for, academic accuracy, but I assume because they're from the Cleveland Clinic and American Red Cross, they're legit. But notice how these two resources, these materials, one an article, one a video, are directly aligned with those discrete in module objectives outlined in the previous column. So the CPR video helps students to achieve 1.2 and 1.3, performing chest compressions and delivering rescue breaths. And then they'll exercise that in their activities, maybe in a group activity or an in-person CPR assessment in a lab or something like that. But again, everything is interrelated and reinforces the other. And an alignment map is a really great way just to sort of lay all that out and to determine, maybe you've inherited a course and you haven't just had the time, maybe you have a bunch of resources and you haven't had the time to go through all of them to make sure they're in alignment with what you're trying to teach. An alignment map is a great way to just map that out. And, us city folks, I think we kind of nerd out to these. We love doing them. At least I do. So we're happy to help you because it is a time-consuming task. But then it helps you to determine, okay, maybe I have an activity here that I don't have a material for, or an objective that I don't have, information on. Then I can fill in those gaps and also maybe eliminate stuff that may be superfluous or maybe stressing your students' cognitive load and get rid of it. Or add it as an enrichment opportunity. So I think an alignment map is a really great way to determine that. And it also goes a long way toward, I think, showing evidence that your course is well designed, right? And you can even, share this with your students. So how to demonstrate alignment. There's a lot of ways of doing it. You can very simply share your alignment map with them. There you can see again how your materials that you've assigned are aligned with your objectives. Or and you can very simply just indicate that. And I've highlighted under the readings and resources using a sample overview for CPR, how these, in parentheses, which readings and resources align with the learning objectives for the week. So that's a great transparent way of just showing that to your students so they know, okay, why am I watching this video? Oh, it's going to help me understand how to perform chest compressions. But there's lots of other ways you can demonstrate alignment. And there's more than this. You could provide a written explanation in the weekly overview. You could communicate that to your students verbally, say if you're in a lecture or in a presentation. You could do an intro video where you talk through some of the resources you've assigned and how it's going to help them achieve their learning goals. You could put it in the course outline in your syllabus, as I've done in the parentheses in the previous slide to show that alignment. And as I've mentioned before, you can share your alignment map. So lots of different ways to do that, but that satisfies that second part of the best practice, right? You're not only determining if they're in alignment, you're also sharing that with your students. So you're being transparent about that relationship, so that, again, they know why they're doing something, that what they're engaging with is meaningful, that it's directed toward their learning, and that it's a useful, time well spent, right? Because we've all had those classes where we're like, why am I reading this? Why am I watching this? I don't know what the purpose is. But this way students know, and I think they feel more deeply connected to what you're teaching them, and to what they're learning when you communicate that. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And in 15 minutes, I rattled through that best practice. But since it's only 1:19, I thought it might be useful to have some time for discussion or questions, because I know that this is a big task, right? It takes a lot of time to read through or watch or engage with all the stuff you're assigning your students. Frankly, I don't have the time to do that myself with the courses that I teach. So have you ever evaluated your learning materials for alignment? I was going to say enlightenment. I'm going back to the meditating skeleton, but and alignment. And how did it go? What obstacles did you encounter? And just what questions do you have about the topic?
Really helpful to have, some of those like very simple kind of tips and tricks. So thank you for adding those.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
in the process of I took over courses that were existing. I'm continuing to kind of evolve them now. And so I think it's a good reminder for me to go back to the basics of, some of that mapping that I would otherwise do if it was like a new course to me versus I'm kind of in this gray zone interim right now. And I think that would really help me to kind of evaluate what had been done historically, what needs to be changed, especially as we're also transitioning to new accreditation standards right now. So I think this is a perfect time and a very nice reminder to make sure that I'm aligning everything and setting myself up for success in the future, I think is a lot of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And I was going to say something and it totally left my mind. Maybe I'll think of it if Peg or Emily, you have anything to add. Oh, you're raising your hand, Peg. Please go ahead.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Piper was saying about it really does for me when I'm working with learning objectives and aligning them. I hated it in the beginning when I had to, physically map out what stuff was doing. But then I discovered after I had gone through that process several times with several different courses, first of all, it became easier. Second of all, I became a better instructor because everything matched. And I wasn't spending time in class looking for the extra sock, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everything just sort of fell into place as I was lecturing because this led to that, led to this, led to that. And teaching became easier. And so I think if we promote learning objective alignment as making your own life easier, it really helps faculty to internalize it and bring it on board. Because I resisted, I just wanted to go out there and wing it, babe. I know what I'm teaching. I know what I'm talking about. I don't need to map anything. I felt it was really confining at first, and now I don't. So
yeah.
Just a story of transition from uh, uh, an old dog who's learning new tricks all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I taught for many years and I had never been introduced to an alignment map until
Yeah.
many years down the road, right? Or even the concept of alignment was something that was I learned much later, right? Because like you, it was like, you know, baby bird, tell them all they need to know. But what I like about what I really well, I like a lot about things about alignment maps, but also about just evaluating for alignment is that it satisfies my need to order things, but it also gave me a lot more confidence as a teacher. And I think that that's
Yes.
another benefit to evaluating for alignment, maybe creating that map. And what I was going to say was, you don't have to do it alone. I should say, I should go back to probably a slide that I had, is that it can seem overwhelming, but if you say you're interested in getting your course evaluated or reviewed for best practices by a city instructional designer, a lot of us will create alignment maps as a part of the process, because that also helps us to see, okay, how does the puzzle fit together? Where are there gaps? Where can we find, um, so, you don't have to do it by yourself, or someone maybe can do that for you. Again, we're not subject matter experts, so we might have a lot of questions. We may evaluate an article and be like, we may not directly see the alignment, but you would, right? So that's where it becomes a partnership between the ID and the faculty member. But yeah, just to reiterate, it can feel daunting, but you have help.
And it's really it really does give you that extra confidence that you need. I really like that. I like that you highlighted that, Laura.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was also going to kind of confirm that as well. I think that's a nice reminder, especially as like I'm, again, kind of stepping into kind of my second year with some of these courses. Like,
Mhm.
I think it just helps me, like, now that I feel like my head is above water a little bit, now I'm like, oh, well, let's try to like actually be a bit more strategic. And I think like one of my own personal goals for teaching is like not necessarily assuming that students are knowing why they're doing something. Like I'm very notorious for just kind of like making that assumption and not being explicit enough about like what the bigger picture is, how things are all aligned. And so again, going through this process, I think will be a nice reminder for me to kind of include that in my kind of spiel and in my also reflected in my Canvas setup and like all of those different things, because that's something that I definitely still need to continue to grow in kind of my like marketing skills, if you will, a little bit, right? And how everything fits together for the students.
Yeah. Yeah, Peg, you put a really good comment in the chat. Did you want to elaborate on that?
Well, just to follow up on what Piper was saying, I mean, we all tend to make those assumptions. I think that's something that happens as we become more and more expert in our topics, and as we become more and more expert at teaching those topics, because those are two separate things, right? Learning how to be a subject matter expert is very different than becoming the subject matter expert as a practitioner or whatever is very different than being able to teach it. And so as we get better at each of those things, we forget that the babies are coming up with they don't know anything about what's in our head. And so rather than just doing the data dumping, which is what we all do, I don't care. Most of us start out as data dumpers, and then we learn to refine our skills so that we give them what they need when they need it, not everything we've ever been taught.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, Peg. And it also reminds me an additional challenge that I think maybe are faced by Rush faculty is that we have a lot of guest lecturers, or often courses have a lot of guest lecturers, right? So you may have a guest lecturer who develops an hour-long slide presentation, right? And they may be new every term, right? So that throws another, factor into the mix, right? Evaluating that for alignment, or making sure that your guest lecturer is going to be addressing the learning objectives that you've communicated to students for that module, right? That can be time consuming, right?
Or you have to go back through and sweep up behind the presenter to
Yeah.
make sure that whatever they did present, you can turn it to be what you wanted them to get, what message you wanted to get across.
Yeah.
Right? That can happen too. You invite a presenter in and there, you wonder, you give them what you want and then they present on something completely opposite. So then you have to go back through and make sure that you touch on those points.
Yeah, and I think that that's another argument in favor of creating and using micro lectures, or chunking your content, right? So if you have a guest lecturer who's presenting on whatever, right? Perhaps they chunk their content into smaller, or you can take a pre-recorded lecture and chunk it as well. Makes it a little easier for you to evaluate for alignment, and then also it makes it easier on your students because then they're not cognitively overwhelmed with an hour and a half long lecture that they are trying to sift through to determine, how it meets their objectives, what they need to learn for that unit. Yeah.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Piper, did you have anything else you wanted to chat about related to the topic, or not? Outside of the topic.
Yeah, no, I think that this was good. Yeah, I think it's nice reminders. I think, for my own journey, I'm getting good at not kind of like knowledge dumping on students, but I think now I'm in the stage of wanting to make sure that I'm communicating that sequence and that process more, because I think that's kind of where there's room for opportunity. So I think this is a good stepping stone in what we reviewed today to supporting that goal.
Oh, great. I'm so glad you found it useful. And I think I always have to remind myself too, right? Like you thinking that students understand the purpose, but then maybe I just assume that they do, and learning to sort of articulate that purpose, not just in your, materials and objectives alignment, but also like in an assignment, right? Why am I doing this? Why am I engaging in this activity? What is it going to, why is it, does it have meaning? Is it not just busy work, right? So, and always being transparent about that, I think is something we have to learn as instructors, once we get into it and realize, oh yes, like as Peg said, they're just starting out, and they might not understand how interconnected all of these things are unless we tell them.
Yeah, having to connect the dots ahead of time almost.
Yeah.
And then building from there.
For sure. Intentionality. That's very, very well put, Peg.
Well, and it's so,
go ahead.
There's so much going on. There's so many different layers to teaching well that it's just so, that's what makes it fun, right? Because as soon as you get really good at one thing, you realize, oh, but then I should be doing this too. And then I need to add this in too. And that's as you grow as a teacher, there's no end to getting better as a teacher, right? There's just you always improve. Hopefully you don't ever devolve.
It's never finished, right? Which is something I think as I've gotten older, learning about that in many aspects of my life has been a challenge, right?
Yeah, Piper nails something in the chat.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that, Piper?
Yeah, I feel like I hear that feedback from the students a lot, is like they have all these assignments and all these things, and they have like their calendars and their plan of what they're going to be doing. And they get really focused on the, like, I need to get this done and what that timeline looks like. That sometimes it's like a forest in the trees thing, right? Because I'm like, we want you to do well, but you don't need to get an A, you just need to learn it. It continues to build, especially I think in some of these like complex health professions. I just want them to sometimes stop and smell the roses a little bit and just like take in like what the purpose is a little bit. Because the information always changes, right? Healthcare is always changing. But the students obviously have things they have to get done as well. So it's figuring out that balance and making sure that things don't get lost.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think your field is constantly changing. So that's another challenge to put into the mix, right? It's not like, I teach the fundamentals of visual, design, right? So I'm not like those things don't change very quickly, but you know, medication, these sorts of things, learning for learning's sake, not for a grade. Yeah. And I think that's what I love. That's what I think. And just to wrap it up, because we are at time, but I love about alignment maps and alignment is that it reinforces so many other things, right? So then like you said, Piper, assignments build on each other, right? So then creating an alignment map and evaluating for this alignment can support like scaffolding approaches, like breaking down complex tasks into smaller steps, right? And building upon that knowledge as you move through the course. So it's like, if you can, I hate the expression kill two birds with one stone, but it's like you can kill five, right? You can start like by just breaking it down and seeing how the pieces fit together, then you really start to like reinforce a lot of other things in your course that are worthwhile. So yeah, I cannot believe that we got through a workshop led by me in 30 minutes, but we did. So thank you so much, Piper, for coming and for your very wonderful insights. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was nice to see all of you. So thank you for this information. I have a new rejuvenated motivation to go back and like look at all my fall Canvas sites and objectives and to make sure that I continue to improve it. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And reach out to us if you need any help with that, you know, as always.
Sounds good. All right. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.